matrix mixes on top of that. The one last we'll talk about in this section is called DCA groups. Now DCA stands for digitally controlled amplifier. An easier way to view it is a way to remotely control a bunch of different channels. Imagine you have all of these set up as drum channels here, and you'd like to ride all of these channels up and down from time to time. You could do that manually with all of this, but a far better way of doing that would be using DCA groups so that you can control all of these faders with just a single fader right over here. Now, one thing to consider is that unlike subgroups, which actually route signals, DCA groups are really just a remote control of channels. Subgroups, basically because they run signals, can be processed like any mix bus, but DCA groups do not have any screens up here. You can't add compression or EQ. It's literally just like having a hand that can control a bunch of faders, and it's really easy to do. Just select the DCA layer over here, and we'll select the first one. Note that there are no screens that come up. Just pressing this select button merely allows us to assign anything, and I mean anything over here, to that DCA group. I could maybe set up all of the drums here to be assigned to this DCA group. I would just select all of these right across here, and then now if I play that, I can ride all of these drums just with this one DCA layer, and you can even mute that as well. You can always check what channels are being assigned to a DCA group by hitting select, and you can see them all come up right here. Now, what other things you could do, you could maybe even select the second one here and have that kill all the effects. You go over to the effects returns there and then select these. These are done in stereo pairs. And that way, this would kill all of your effects at one time. Or maybe you'd want the third one here to kill all of your monitors. So in other words, you select this one here and go over to your bus masters, maybe your first 8 bus mixes right over here are your monitor sends, right? If you select that over here, then this will absolutely kill all of your monitors. Very, very cool. So you can see, that's precisely why you have bus masters on both sides of the console. It allows you to include these bus mixes in DCA groups. So you can control a DCA's volume and also its mute, but you cannot process that DCA group like a regular submix. Remember, it's just like a remote control, which kind of brings up a couple of benefits. Firstly, the aux sends that are set up post fader on any channel that are controlled by a DCA group will ride along with that change whenever you change the level of that DCA group. Try doing that with a subgroup. Also, if you want to keep any stereo mixes intact, you would need to use 2 subgroups, but a single DCA group can control a bunch of channels. There are no concern with panning because all of that is handled over here by the actual channels doing all of the work. Again, a DCA group is just like kind of doing this. It's a remote control for a bunch of faders. And just before we leave this section, I want to quickly explain a very useful little function on the X32. Note there's a little button called Sends on Fader right between the two different sides of the console. Now this function will only work for the 16 mix buses. Imagine this. We want to set up a monitor mix for our lead vocalist on mix bus number 1. We could go through each of the input channels here and crank up the send in differing amounts to make up a mix for that monitor mix for our lead vocalist. Now, we could do it another way too. What we do is we go to the bus master, we select that mix bus master, that is our monitor mix here, then hit sends on faders. Then when we select our input channels over here, these become the sends to our bus master that is selected. As long as that's flashing there, then these become how much you want to send to that mix bus number 1, which is our monitor sends. Much easier than pulling up each channel and using the send 1 knob here. Now the inverse is also true. You can use the same sends on fader to do this. Imagine you wanted quick access to all 16 sends on channel 1, for instance. You can use the knobs up here as we've done before. Let me just turn this off and we'll select the first channel here. You can use these 4 sets of knobs here, but you could even use the faders down here. And here's how we can do it. We select channel 1, then sends on fader, and then either bus layer over here on the right hand side for bus number 1 through 8 or 9 through 16, and then these become the sends for this selected channel. And you can see that happening up here. In fact, I can prove it can do that because if I select those ones down here, you can actually move those faders around. So 2 different uses of that sends on fader. It's very, very cool. These are shortcuts to be used really only when you're really familiar with the console. In fact, you might see all sorts of different ways to kind of do the same thing on the X32. My advice is to start, really with the basics and add these shortcuts to your repertoire as you get more familiar with getting around on your X32.